I'm here, man. It's cool. That was textbook. So you gonna make it? You got any medical supplies you can use? Hostiles are in play. Check your ammo. Hey, dude, you're fucked up. Stick something on that.
Greetings and salutations, my fellow gamers. My name is AFarCryAway, and today's video is actually going to be on Far Cry. I know, that's kind of weird. For a guy whose name is AFarCryAway, I've done very little Far Cry coverage and gameplay. But today's video is going to be kind of a special look back on the whole Far Cry series, and just what makes it so good to me personally, and why I've been kind of shy to talk about Far Cry 5. So to me, Far Cry has always been this really cool open-world survival sandbox game. The original concept of you being on an island and surviving in these hellish conditions, it produced this really cool dichotomy between this really beautiful island and then the fact that there's mercenaries on the island and you're trying to fight for your life to survive against overwhelming odds. I've always really loved that part of the original game, and also Far Cry Instincts, which is kind of like the original game, but a little bit different. Now, these games were linear, but they did allow you more freedom in how you chose to fight in engagements, more so than many other games at the time did, besides maybe Halo with its large sandbox arenas with multiple weapons and vehicles in it and whatnot. But what made Far Cry special was the pseudo-stealth mechanics that it added. I have a lot of wonderful childhood memories of crawling through thick grass, totally concealed from the enemies that were mere feet away from me, then throwing a rock behind them to distract them just long enough for me to get the jump on them. And then things would go crazy, of course, and bullets were flying everywhere, alarms were sounding, and nowhere was safe, as a bullet would rip just right through buildings and then hit you if you weren't careful. This moment-to-moment gameplay was really fantastic, and it's what got me hooked on Far Cry long before the days of the compelling villains like Voss and the more open-world game mechanics that were added. Now, Far Cry 2 was an interesting game for me growing up because my expectations were totally subversed in a few ways. I was expecting the same style of game, but got something a lot different from what I was used to from Far Cry. This game was not set on the sunny island paradise, but in the UAC, or the unnamed African country thought to be in Central Africa. And to make things even more alien to Far Cry 1, this African country was in the middle of a civil war between the UFFL and the APR, with mercenaries taking up arms for both sides in hopes of profiting off the war. And as if things aren't already crazy enough, your player character, who you get to choose yourself, which is pretty neat, enters the country to hunt down the notorious black market weapons dealer known as the Jackal. And as you know, the Jackal finds you in your hotel's bed, sick with malaria, and decides to spare your life in exchange for you to leave the country and forget about taking him out. Brief side note, the Jackal is thought to be Jack Carver from the first game. This is just a theory, though, but it could be cool, I guess?
Do you understand what I'm saying? Nobody kills me. Nobody. I'm the one who decides who lives and who dies. Me.
Alright, I'm getting a bit off track. So now we're here in this warring country with a target on our back, blood money to be earned, and weapons and hired guns to acquire, all in the hopes of tracking down the Jackal. Now the player gets to decide which factions to work for, which kind of side goals you wish to complete, and which buddies to bring along on your adventure. Already, there's a lot more going on in this than Far Cry 1. At the time, I remember not exactly loving this new direction, but having grown up playing the Stalker franchise, I see Far Cry 2 as a glistening gem of a game. You not only get to choose how and when your engagements go down, but now there is more tools at your disposal to accomplish these tasks. So you can burn the dry grass around your enemies as a diversion, then you can snipe them from afar, and then you can drive a jeep into the middle of their camp, hop onto the machine guns, and just proceed to mow them all down. Now, on the hardcore difficulties, your game plans are going to change a bit because, you take 2 bullets and you're basically dead. And seeing as there's no traditional quick saving in Far Cry 2, death means a return to your previous safe house that you slept at the night before. You really have to rely on your wits on these harder difficulties, going from cover to cover, severely injuring enemies, and then using them as bait as their friends come out of cover trying to save them. And then sometimes you know, you're gonna really have to conserve those healing items. It really does feel like a hardcore, oppressive atmosphere, kind of like Stalker, minus the ability to quick save after each kill, of course. Oh, and to add to this, your weapons also break down over time, your malaria flares up occasionally, forcing you to, you know, have to take medicine, and then taking this medicine in the middle of a firefight basically leaves you exposed to fire and fighting. So, you're gonna die a lot in Far Cry 2. Life is hard in the UAC, and playing Far Cry 2 will really open your eyes to how immersive an open-world sandbox can be. And that's just scratching the surface of Far Cry 2. I've actually never beaten the game myself. I've put probably like 50 hours into the 360 version, and now I've put 4 hours into the Steam version on the PC Master Race. By the way, if you're planning on playing the PC version, there's Steam guides that kind of help you set it up for modern gaming systems, as well as there's a few graphical mods that can really help boost this immersion. I recommend the Pyroids Sweet FX Graphical Enhancement config on ModDB, as it doesn't really hurt your performance that much and makes the colors look way less drab than the base game. Okay, so now the reason I've not talked much about Far Cry 5 on this channel is because it really just looks like another version of Far Cry 3 to me. The jump between Far Cry 1 and 2 showed a ton of innovation to the gameplay and design. The leap between 2 and 3 was also quite large, but not as impactful. See, 3 is a wonderful game with a few shortcomings to me personally. It felt like the gritty nature of 2's survival mechanics had been slightly nerfed. Far Cry 3 is a much easier and more accessible game to people. This is not completely a bad thing, and I'm sure a lot more people actually would have beaten 3 than beaten 2. But you know, I really enjoyed this new setting and the new things in it, and the fact that it's back on an island, and the whole having a compelling boss character. Everything in Far Cry 3 was really epic, and it kind of took things to the next level. It took the previous gameplay systems, and sure, it got rid of a lot of the important ones, but it took some of the basic ones and made them a lot more fleshed out. Even the combat feels way better in Far Cry 3. Here's the thing though, Far Cry 2 made you feel very isolated and very under-equipped to handle a lot of the situations you're in. The game's whole core mechanic revolves around shooting and moving, meaning you shoot, and then you run away, and then relocate, and then engage from a different direction. You know, that way you can keep the AI kind of guessing to where you are, and as long as you have the drop on them, you're constantly able to keep the upper foot, whereas in Far Cry 3, you can either go through the whole game stealth using sniper rifles with suppressors that, by the way, you don't really get access to in Far Cry 2. Or you can just straight up murder everyone in Far Cry 3 with almost little to no repercussions, assuming you're good enough to play on the harder settings in the first place. To put it simply, Far Cry 1 and 2 were about being weak and then becoming stronger, whereas 3 was trying to do that, but it's more like a power fantasy from beginning to end. Even with the basic skills in Far Cry 3, clearing out the encampments is not very difficult, and that's kind of the meat of the game, at least for me. But where Far Cry 3 really did shine was in its side content, going hunting for animals and equipping and finding plants and creating drugs for yourself to get advantages, and all of the stuff that was secondary to the base gameplay in Far Cry 3 was so much better than Far Cry 2 ever could have provided. I think Far Cry 3 is fantastic, but I really wish it hadn't nerfed things in Far Cry 2 that made that game so special and unique. The buddy system isn't even in Far Cry 3, which is a damn shame. And I mean, sure, you get to fight alongside those Rocky Yacht bros, but it's just not the same. There's moments in Far Cry 3 that did feel very reminiscent to the first game. One, the setting, and then two, the fact that you start kind of like a weakling, and then you gradually get stronger and stronger over the course of the game. But it really does just feel more like a modern FPS title that had a few more things going for it than most other modern FPS titles had. I've played through Far Cry 3 about 3 or 4 times already, and really, it's a solid game. I do enjoy my time with it. It just doesn't feel the same as Far Cry 2 and the original Far Cry in terms of that kind of tone. Now, I'm not saying tone is necessarily what makes a game good or bad, but for me personally, I just enjoyed 2's ways more. Like, its atmosphere, its direction, its meaning to make you feel weak at all times, and even once you get an RPG and a nice sniper rifle and stuff, you're still getting shot up and torn to pieces if you're not careful. I really miss Far Cry 2. So finally, to wrap this up, I'm going to start talking about Far Cry 5. So, Far Cry 5, from what I've seen, it looks good. But the problem is I basically skipped 4 because 4 really, in a lot of ways, is a repeat of 3. Just in a new setting with a new main bad guy. And then Far Cry Primal, although it does look innovative and it has a lot of things going for it, I did skip it more just because it really isn't even a Far Cry game at the point that it's at. It has the mechanics, but it isn't quite what I want in a Far Cry game. I admire them for trying it and trying something new. Ubisoft really, like, when they're at their best, it's when they're trying new things, so I do appreciate that. It just wasn't for me. Far Cry 5 really seems like they're going for the feel of Far Cry 3, you know, lots of really interesting and fun side activities, things to do that will keep you very engaged throughout the course of the game. However, I'm very concerned about the story, which it could be fine, and I do think the main villain, from what we've heard about him so far, he seems like he could be very, very compelling. But at the same time, the games have never really been about that, at least not to me. I think Voss was great, he really did steal the show in Far Cry 3, but once they iced him, what, 3/4 of the way through? Spoiler alert, sorry. It just took a lot away from that story, and at that point you really were falling back on the gameplay. And the problem was the gameplay of Far Cry 3 is just so much more straightforward and mainstream and streamlined and simplified than Far Cry 2's was, and it just doesn't feel like you're living in the game world. It really does feel like the game world is revolving around you, the player. And I'm just worried for Far Cry 5. Like, I really hope the game is two things. One, brutally difficult, which, from the gameplay I've seen, it's not really brutally difficult, but it might be more challenging than 4 and 3 were. But I'm also hoping that the game really does try its best to immerse you into its game world. It's a pretty ludicrous game world. It's the whole cult running in America thing. Seems a little far-fetched, but it is based in somewhat reality, based on the fact that there are cults and whatnot. I just really hope they do a good job of making me feel like I'm not there just to be the super mega badass, but I'm there to survive. I think the thing that makes Far Cry special is survival, and if they can get that right, I'll like the game. Alright, so that's been my video on why I like Far Cry, and I think it was a long time coming because honestly, Far Cry is a series that has inspired not only my name on all the consoles and my YouTube channel and everything, but it's been a game that has inspired me in game design kind of ways. I don't make games, but its core designs have been something I've always been intrigued with, and I've always found fun and enjoyment being in the worlds of every Far Cry game, and the way that it's kind of made me into a first-person shooter fanatic, everything. I think Far Cry is really the game. I played so much Far Cry Instincts on the original Xbox growing up. That game really did shape the way I see first-person shooters and campaigns in general. And if you haven't played any of those original Far Cry games, give them a shot. I know the first one on PC now is a little difficult, and not in that like, oh, get good kind of way. There's just points in it where you just die for no reason. But it's an interesting game and it has a lot of cool things going for it. It's almost like the original Crysis in a lot of ways, so do check that out. Also, if you have an original Xbox or the Xbox 360, try out Far Cry Instincts and Far Cry Instincts Predator or Evolution, something like that. They're really good games, and they're also kind of janky in places, but they have a lot of cool ideas and things going for them. And you know, the superpowers thing towards the end of Instincts is really cool, so I do recommend trying those out. So yeah, that's my video on Far Cry. I'll talk to you guys next time.